The warm pregnancy report was still clutched in Eleanor Harper's palm. The smell of disinfectant from the hospital corridor hadn't faded. She had deliberately changed into a soft, light apricot knit top to conceal her slightly swollen belly, and walked through the front door with a heart full of joy. In the living room, her sister Serena Harper was curled up on the sofa, coddled in their parents' arms. The coffee table was piled with the luxury skincare products their parents had specially bought for Serena. Since childhood, everything good in the house had always gone to Serena first. "Mom, Dad, Serena, I have something important to tell you." Eleanor's fingertips rested lightly on her stomach, her eyes hiding anticipation. "I'm pregnant. I can go for a scan next week to see the heartbeat." As soon as she finished, her mother Violet Harper shot up from the sofa. The tenderness on her face shattered in an instant. She raised her hand and struck hard against Eleanor's protruding belly. A sharp pain spread through her abdomen. Eleanor staggered back, her lower back slamming painfully into the corner of a solid wooden cabinet, and she doubled over in agony. "How dare you get pregnant first?" Violet grabbed her wrist, nails digging into her flesh, her shriek rattling the living room chandelier. "The first grandchild in this family has to be Serena's. You wretched thing, stealing her luck. Even if you're pregnant, you have to give it to her." Her father stood by, watching coldly, without a word of dissuasion. Instead, he murmured in agreement, "Listen to your mother. Give the child to Serena, and we'll love you twice as much from now on." Serena feigned a pitiful reddening of her eyes, pretending to pull Violet back, but her eyes gleamed with triumph. From childhood, their parents had always favored her, right or wrong. Now even Eleanor's unborn child was to be claimed as her own. In this household, 3 generations of women had always been arbitrarily measured and ranked. Eleanor, who was sensible and forbearing, deserved to yield and sacrifice. Serena, skilled in playing the victim, could monopolize everything. Eleanor clutched her cramping stomach, cold sweat soaking through her clothes. Years of suppressed grievances collapsed inside her. Gritting her teeth, refusing to show weakness, she was about to retort when the shrill ring of the doorbell cut through the chaos. Violet cursed impatiently, turned, and yanked open the door. The instant she saw the figure outside, the blood in her veins turned to ice. Her legs went weak, trembling uncontrollably, her face drained white as paper. Outside stood a woman who was an exact replica of Eleanor, the same features, the same silhouette, even the same faint birthmark behind the ear. The only difference was her eyes, icy and distant, as she stood silently on the doorstep, staring straight at the stunned family inside. Clutching her agonizing belly, Eleanor watched her mother's collapse and felt a chilling premonition rise within her. This face, identical to her own, held a secret past enough to tear the entire family apart. The doorbell rang again, the second note sharper than the first, like an ice pick driving straight into Violet's temple. The woman's gaze passed over Violet's trembling shoulders and landed on a small dark stain spreading on the living room floor, the trace of amniotic fluid mixed with blood from Eleanor's retreat. Eleanor Harper felt a warm stickiness trickling down her inner thigh. She instinctively reached down to cover her belly, but her fingers met the dampness soaking through her knitwear. The chill seeped in from all sides. The lingering antiseptic smell of the corridor was now completely overwhelmed by the metallic tang of blood. She tried to call for her mother, but her throat seemed blocked, and only a short gasp came out. The woman stepped 1 foot inside the doorway. She wore a sharply tailored dark gray trench coat, and her light chestnut curls, the same as Eleanor's, were dampened by the early autumn drizzle of Eldbrook, sticking to her cheekbones. She raised her hand and tucked a stray lock behind her ear, revealing a small, pale brown birthmark shaped like a ginkgo leaf. Exactly the same. Violet. Her voice was cold as the mist drifting over the Severn River. All these years, is this how you've raised her? Violet staggered back, her heel catching on the shoe cabinet, and she fell into her husband Richard Harper's arms. Richard instinctively steadied his wife, but his gaze was fixed on the visitor's face, as if he'd seen a ghost. He opened his mouth, his Adam's apple bobbing, and finally forced out a few fractured syllables. Kate. Kate. Kate is dead, the woman said expressionlessly. She died the day you sent her away 21 years ago. My name is Erin. The living room fell so quiet that the ticking of the old wall clock was audible. Serena, who had been coiled on the sofa, dropped her pretense of grievance and stared at the woman who looked exactly like Eleanor, her pupils contracting sharply. She understood all too well what identical meant in this house: another competitor, another person to divide their parents' attention. Since childhood, she had been used to having all the good things to herself, from the limited edition teddy bear her mother brought back from Windsor Avenue in primary school, to the second-hand Mini Cooper her father bought her for her 16th birthday. But now this woman not only had Eleanor's face, she also called her mother by her full name, in the tone of an inquisitor. Eleanor leaned against the wooden cabinet, the dull ache in her back and the cramping in her belly intertwining, her vision blurring. She saw Erin walk towards her, the hem of her grey trench coat brushing past Violet's rigid calf. Erin crouched down, met Eleanor's eyes, and for that instant Eleanor saw her own reflection in Erin's pupils, pale, dishevelled, full of disbelief. Don't be afraid, Erin said, reaching out to cover Eleanor's icy hand with her palm. Her touch was light, but carried a strange certainty. An ambulance is already on its way. I called before I came in. Violet finally found her voice. She wrenched herself out of Richard's hold, lunged forward 2 steps, her knuckles white, and shrieked in a voice that had gone shrill. Why are you back? You promised never to come back, never to interfere with our lives. Your lives. Erin slowly straightened up and turned her head, sweeping her calm gaze over Violet, then Richard, and finally settling on Serena. You mean the life you built by stealing my sister's child? Or the life you maintain by using your daughters as bargaining chips, as tools, as sacrifices? Serena sprang up from the sofa, grabbed a cushion, and hurled it at Erin. Who the hell do you think you are? Stop talking nonsense here. The cushion hit Erin's shoulder and bounced off limply. She didn't even glance down. She merely tilted her head slightly and said to Serena, You're 23 years old, and you still throw things when you lose your temper. When Eleanor was 2 years younger than you, curled up in bed with her first period cramps, your mother was choosing a private school uniform for you. Did you know that? Serena's face flushed red and white by turns. Richard stepped forward, trying to project paternal authority, but his voice trembled. Kate, Erin, whoever you are, let's go inside and sit down and talk about this, not in front of the children. Children. Erin finally smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Eleanor's unborn child is the only child here. I heard you at the door. You told her to give her 6-week pregnancy to Serena. Do you think this is a supermarket, buy one get one free yogurt? Eleanor began to shake uncontrollably. She clutched Erin's hand, her nails digging into Erin's palm, and whispered, I hurt. Erin bent down immediately, her other hand reaching for Eleanor's lower back, feeling a warm dampness. Her expression changed for a split second. She turned and shouted at Violet and Richard, She's bleeding. Are you just going to stand there and watch? Violet's lips quivered, the last color draining from her face. She involuntarily took half a step forward, then stopped short, as if nailed to the spot. Richard did move. He went to grab his car keys, muttering, I'll drive her to the hospital, but Erin cut him off without looking back. No need. The paramedics will be here any minute. You stay here. Don't go anywhere. The wail of the ambulance grew nearer, blue and red lights flickering through the living room's sheer curtains. Erin took off her trench coat, wrapped it carefully around Eleanor's upper body, shielding her from Violet's and Richard's view, and whispered in Eleanor's ear, "I'm your sister. Identical twins, born 7 minutes apart. They gave me away and kept you. I wasn't going to tell you this in your whole life, but you can't stay in this house anymore." Eleanor's consciousness wavered between the searing pain and the shock. Vaguely, she remembered a recurring dream from her childhood, a little girl, who looked exactly like her, sitting on a grey meadow, waving at her. Every time she woke up, she thought she had just been looking at herself in a mirror. So it hadn't been a dream. The siren stopped outside. 2 paramedics in green uniforms rushed in with a stretcher. Erin straightened up quickly, and, in impeccably standard Westermark English, gave Eleanor's gestational age, bleeding volume, and approximate blood pressure. One of the paramedics glanced at Erin, then at Eleanor on the stretcher, and paused for a second, but professional discretion kept him from asking. As the stretcher was wheeled out, Eleanor turned her head for one last look at the living room. Violet was slumped on the arm of the sofa, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders heaving violently. Richard stood beside her, one hand on her back, but his eyes were locked on Erin. Serena stood by the window with her arms crossed, her expression twisted as if she wanted to cry but couldn't, her mouth oddly downturned. Erin didn't follow them out. She stood under the porch, raindrops dripping from the eaves and splashing at her feet. She turned back to the 3 blood relatives inside and said, "When Eleanor wakes up, I'll take her for a DNA test. You can hire lawyers, call the police, keep playing your it's for your own good farce. But before that, I suggest you think hard whether the reason you gave for sending me away back then will hold up in front of a judge." She paused, then added, "Oh, and by the way, my adoptive mother left me all the documents. Receipts, signatures, and that relinquishment of parental rights statement you wrote. Both your signatures are on it." Violet's hand slowly fell from her face, revealing red, swollen, bloodshot eyes. She opened her mouth, her voice hoarse and barely audible. "Your adoptive mother," she promised. "She promised not to tell Eleanor," Erin said. "She didn't promise me. And now she's gone, so I don't have to keep her promise anymore." The rain grew heavier. Erin turned and walked towards the ambulance, her coat taken by Eleanor, leaving her only in a thin black turtleneck. The rain soon darkened her shoulders. She climbed into the ambulance, the doors closed, and the blue and red lights turned the corner and disappeared into the thick grey mist. In the living room, the clock struck 5. Richard finally let go of Violet's shoulders and walked to the window, gazing at the empty street. After a long while, he said, "They look exactly alike." Violet did not reply. She looked down at the darkening stain on the floor, like a wilted flower. Suddenly she remembered, 21 years ago, that rainy night, the nurse carrying 2 infants wrapped in pale blue blankets into the ward, asking if she had chosen names. She pointed to the one on the left and said, "This one is Eleanor." Then, pointing to the right, she hesitated and said, "This one, we'll see." That "we'll see" baby had come back today. And she had just struck the other daughter's swollen belly with her own hand. Serena had quietly gone upstairs without anyone noticing. Violet heard a muffled slam from the top of the stairs, then the click of a lock. Richard was still at the window, his back more stooped. Above the fireplace hung a family portrait. Eleanor stood at the edge in a pale blue floral dress, smiling shyly, while Serena squeezed between their parents, holding an ice cream cone with chocolate smeared at the corner of her mouth. Violet slowly crouched down, pulled a tissue from the coffee table, and began wiping the blood off the floor. The tissue soaked through quickly. She changed it, and changed it again, until that small patch of tile was polished to a shine, reflecting her own face. That face was streaked with tears. She couldn't remember the last time she had cried for Eleanor. Maybe when Eleanor was 7 and had a high fever, Violet had stayed by her bedside all night, and when the fever broke at dawn, she cried. But at that moment, she had been thinking of the other child. If she hadn't given her away, she'd be starting primary school too. She cried for the one she sent away, not for the one who stayed. This thought had pricked at her chest like a fine needle for many years, and she had never told anyone, not until now, until the ambulance sound had vanished in the rain, that she realized she had never truly seen Eleanor's face. The ambulance stopped at the emergency entrance of Eldbrook General Hospital. Erin held Eleanor's hand all the way, warmth passing through her palm. Eleanor's face was half hidden under an oxygen mask, her lashes wet whether from rain or tears, it was hard to tell. Just before they wheeled her into the emergency room, Eleanor suddenly tightened her grip on Erin's fingers and whispered weakly, "What's your name again?" "Erin," she said, bending down so Eleanor could see her eyes clearly. "Erin Blake. You're Eleanor Harper. We shared the same womb, and then we were separated. It won't happen again." The emergency room doors closed. The red light came on. Erin leaned against the cold wall of the corridor, slowly sliding down to sit on the floor. She looked up at the harsh white ceiling lights and remembered the brown paper envelope her adoptive mother had pressed into her hands on her deathbed. Inside, besides all the legal papers, there was a yellowed note in Violet's neat handwriting. "Kate, I'm sorry. But we could only keep one. The other we will raise well, I promise you." Erin closed her eyes and buried her face in her knees. At the end of the corridor, a nurse pushed a medication trolley past, its wheels rattling over the floor tiles. She could hear the steady beeping of monitors from inside the emergency room, and the low hum of doctors' voices. She waited a long time. She waited until the sky outside the corridor windows turned completely dark, and the mist of Eldbrook seeped through the window cracks, cold and damp. She waited until a young, bespectacled doctor pushed open the door, holding a report, and nodded at her. "The patient's vital signs are stable. The bleeding has stopped, and the baby is safe. But she needs at least 2 weeks of bed rest, and she must not be emotionally stressed." Erin stood up, took the report, and glanced at the dense English terminology and numbers. Her fingers traced the paper, and she suddenly felt that this document was as thin and as heavy as the relinquishment form from 21 years ago. She pushed open the ward door. Eleanor lay in bed, her face turned to the side, asleep, hair scattered on the pillow, breathing steady. Erin pulled up a chair, sat beside the bed, folded the report, and put it in her pocket. She looked at Eleanor's peaceful sleeping face, that face, identical to her own, now free of fear, free of grievance, only bearing the fragile relaxation of exhaustion. Outside, the last ferry on the Severn River sounded its deep, long horn in the distance. Erin reached out and gently brushed a stray lock of hair from Eleanor's forehead, murmuring, "Sleep. When you wake up, I'll tell you everything." The warm yellow nightlight in the ward illuminated 2 nearly overlapping faces, one awake, one asleep, separated by 21 years of misplaced time. And a few miles away, in the Harper house, Violet had finally wiped the last trace of blood from the floor. She stood up, her knees cracking. She walked to the foot of the stairs, looked up at the locked door on the second floor, raised her hand to knock, then lowered it. She turned and went into the kitchen, boiled some water. The kettle whistled, steam rising and clouding her face. She stared at the tea bag floating in her cup, and suddenly remembered many years ago, so long ago, she could barely recall the year, when the nurse laid the 2 babies side by side in her arms. The smaller one cried loudly, the other lay quietly watching her with open eyes. She chose the quiet one to keep, because she thought she would be easier. And the one she had just struck was that quiet child. The tea in her cup had gone cold. Violet did not drink it, she poured it down the sink. The running water washed away the last warmth, and with it the words she had never been able to voice. "I'm sorry, Eleanor." But she never said them aloud. The night rain of Eldbrook beat against the ward window, tracing winding rivulets that fragmented the spire of St. Andrew's Church beyond. When Eleanor woke, the first thing she felt was not the dull ache in her abdomen, but the warmth of a hand gently holding her right hand dry, steady, with calloused fingertips. She turned her head. Erin sat on the narrow visitor's chair, her back straight, but her head drooping slightly, her light chestnut curls falling to cover half her face. She was asleep, breathing evenly, but her grip on Eleanor's hand never loosened, as if some instinctive need to protect. Eleanor studied that face, so identical to her own, for a long time. In the dim ward light, she could see a tiny pale brown freckle on Erin's right nostril. Eleanor knew she had one herself, usually covered with foundation. It was the last visible joke their shared chromosomes had left them. She gently pulled her fingers. Erin woke instantly, her eyelids snapped open, her gaze sharpening from drowsiness to alertness in less than a second. Seeing Eleanor awake, she let go, pressed the call button, then leaned close, her voice low and soft, "Don't move. The doctor said there was a slight placental abruption, but the bleeding has stopped. You still need bed rest until at least next week." Eleanor opened her mouth. Her throat was as dry as sandpaper. Erin immediately brought a cup of warm water with a straw to her lips. Eleanor took a few sips, the metallic taste of blood fading slightly, and finally managed to speak, hoarse and muffled, "The baby. Heartbeat is still there." Erin pulled a sonogram from the bedside drawer, a small fuzzy grey shadow, with FHR 156 BPM, printed beside it. "We did an emergency scan this morning. The heartbeat is steady. It's a stubborn little one." Eleanor stared at that tiny rice grain-sized embryo on the black and white image, and her nose suddenly stung. She remembered yesterday afternoon. No, it was the day before yesterday, when she had walked in joyfully clutching the blood test report, hiding a secret under her knit top that she thought would be met with cheers and hugs. Instead, she was met with her mother's slap, her father's indifferent agreement, and her sister's barely hidden glee. Tears welled up, burning her eyes. She shut them, letting the tears slide down her temples into her hair, not making a sound. Erin folded the sonogram back into the drawer, then reached out to tuck Eleanor's damp hair behind her ear. Her touch was light, her fingertips brushing Eleanor's earlobe and pausing on the ginkgo leaf-shaped birthmark. She touched her own same spot and said softly, "Our adoptive mother, my adoptive mother, Dorothy Blake, when she told me the truth at 14, the first thing she said was, 'You have a ginkgo leaf behind your ear, and your sister has one too. When you were separated, the hospital put matching labels on your blankets, but later someone tore them off.'" Eleanor opened her eyes, her lashes still wet, her voice trembling. When did you know about me?" 16 years ago." Erin withdrew her hand, sat back, clasped her hands on her knees, and gazed out at the rain-blurred streetlights. Dorothy was a history professor at Woodford University, never married. She got me from a church-affiliated adoption agency, with only a thin file that gave my birth mother's name Violet Harper, and father Richard Harper, and a note, second twin, birth weight 2.8 kilograms, relinquished due to family financial difficulties. She paused, a faint, almost mocking smile curling at the corner of her mouth. "Financial difficulties. You hear that?" Eleanor's heart sank. The Harpers had a 3-story townhouse, with a garden in the southeastern suburbs of Eldbrook. Richard worked as an actuary in the financial district, and Violet, though a full-time mother, had a trust fund from her family. Even during the worst of the financial crisis in Eleanor's childhood, the family never cut Serena's ballet lessons, or Violet's Windsor Avenue shopping sprees. Financial difficulties, 4 light words that concealed a deliberate severance. Dorothy wrote to the agency every year, asking for news of my sister. They always replied, records sealed for privacy. Until she died last year. When I was sorting her belongings, I found a brown paper envelope in a hidden compartment of her study. Inside was the relinquishment statement and a letter. Erin pulled a clear document bag from her coat pocket, took out a few yellowed sheets, and handed one to Eleanor. Eleanor took it with her UN-needled left hand, her fingers shaking. It was a thin sheet of letterhead paper embossed with the old crest of St. Mary's Hospital maternity ward. The handwriting was Violet's neat and elegant, written 21 years earlier. To the adoption agency director. After careful consideration, I, Violet Harper, and my husband Richard Harper, have decided to relinquish custody of the second twin, born the 14th of March 1995, at 1947, weight 2.8 kilograms. The first twin, born 1940, weight 3.1 kilograms, will remain with us. The second twin is healthy, with no congenital conditions, and we hope she will be placed appropriately. We feel deep regret for this decision, but we believe it is in the best interests of both children. P.S. The second twin is provisionally named Kate. The adoptive family may rename her if they wish. Sincerely. Violet Harper, signed, Richard Harper, signed. Witness, head nurse Frances Morrison. Eleanor's gaze stopped on the phrase, best interests. She read it 3 times. Something inside her chest, the string that had been stretched tight for over 20 years, snapped with an audible crack. She remembered a winter night, when she was 8. Serena had a fever of 39 degrees, and Violet stayed by Serena's bed all night, while Eleanor coughed all night in the next room. The next day her voice was hoarse, and Violet only gave her a glass of honey water and told her, "Don't disturb your sister." So from the very first day of their lives, they had been ranked. One was the carefully kept firstborn, the other the second for the best arrangement. And 21 years later, when Eleanor came home with her new life to share, the slap on her belly came from the same logic: Serena always first, Eleanor always second. This document, Eleanor said, her voice hoarse, but her eyes suddenly bright with determination, can this be used as legal evidence? Erin nodded. Dorothy was a history professor. She handled documents more carefully than anyone. This statement has Frances Morrison's seal. I checked that head nurse retired 20 years ago, but her employment records and signature samples can still be matched. Also, she pulled another folded sheet from the bag. This is a copy of the original delivery record, which explicitly states, twin pregnancy, natural delivery, first and second twins have identical physical features, symmetrical birthmarks behind the ears. Once we do a DNA test, our identical twin status will be irrefutable. Eleanor gripped the letter, her knuckles white. She laughed shortly, a sound with a nasal edge. Identical twins. They gave away one exactly like the other, and kept the other, just because Serena cried first by 7 minutes. Just because they thought I was easy. Erin was silent for a few seconds, then reached over and covered Eleanor's clenched fist, gently forcing her fingers open to keep her from cutting her palm. I checked the agency's internal memo from that year, she said, her voice dropping lower. There was a handwritten note. The handwriting was faint, but I had it analyzed. It was Violet's. She paused, as if weighing whether to say the next part. Eleanor fixed her eyes on her. Erin took a deep breath. She wrote, "Second twin is quiet and not prone to crying. Should adapt more quickly to a new environment." The ward fell silent except for the regular beep of the monitor. The rain outside had softened to a fine mist that clung to the glass like frosted paper. Eleanor stared at a thin crack in the ceiling, her mind repeating those words: quiet, not prone to crying, should adapt more quickly to a new environment. Because she was quiet, she was suited to be sent away. Because she didn't cry or make a fuss, she deserved to be sacrificed. All her life, she had never fought for anything. She gave Serena her birthday presents when asked. She gave up her scholarship quota to the school when Serena wanted it. She even silently handed over the phone number of the high school basketball captain she secretly liked, though he had never even looked at Serena. She thought that was being considerate, that it was normal for parents to favor the more outgoing sister. She thought that if she was gentle enough, obedient enough, one day her parents would see her worth. But her goodness had been defined from the beginning as easy to discard. A sudden sharp cramp shot through her abdomen, as if someone had twisted her uterus. Eleanor gasped and instinctively curled up. Erin pressed the call button immediately. Within a minute, the duty doctor rushed in, listened to the fetal heartbeat, checked the abdominal contractions, and finally breathed a sigh of relief. Stress-induced contractions from emotional fluctuation, nothing serious. But Miss Harper, you absolutely cannot be agitated right now. Family, he looked at Erin, please limit visits and conversation topics. Erin thanked him. After the doctor left, she sat on the edge of the bed and rested her palm gently over Eleanor's belly, through the thin hospital gown. The skin was still warm, and beneath it was a faint, almost imperceptible pulse, another heart beating. Listen, Erin said, her voice low, almost a whisper. I had planned to wait until you were calmer to tell you all this. But since you've already seen the documents, let me tell you what I'm going to do next. First, I'll contact a lawyer and formally write to the Harpers, demanding they admit that the relinquishment was illegal, because the statement has only Violet and Richard's signatures, without any independent child welfare review, no judge or social worker's countersignature, which, under Westermark's adoption procedures in the mid-90s, is a major procedural flaw. Second, I'll apply to the court for all original records from St. Mary's Hospital delivery logs, neonatal scores, the list of duty nurses that year, to complete the chain of evidence. Third, she looked Eleanor in the eye and said each word deliberately, if you're willing, I can help you apply for a restraining order against them. Your current address, phone number, all contacts, they will no longer be allowed to initiate contact with you, unless you agree. Eleanor's lashes trembled. A restraining order. That meant cutting all ties with the home she'd lived in for 21 years. She remembered the family portrait above the fireplace, herself on the far edge, wearing Serena's faded hand-me-down dress. But she was smiling genuinely in that photo, because the photographer had told her that day, your posture is even better than your sister's, one of the few times she'd been praised. What about Serena? Eleanor asked. Erin's gaze cooled a degree. She's not automatically covered unless you include her. But given the cushion throwing I saw yesterday, she'll likely show up on her own. Eleanor closed her eyes. She knew Serena too well. Since childhood, anything that belonged to Eleanor, even an old sweater, no one paid attention, till as soon as Eleanor showed the faintest sign of I don't want it, or you can have it, Serena would snatch it immediately. Now Eleanor carried a child, a new life, that should have been the family's shared joy. Of course Serena wouldn't let it go. She won't give up, Eleanor said, opening her eyes, her voice now calmer, like a lake after a storm. She'll think I stole something from her. You heard Mum yesterday, the first grandchild must be Serena's, even if you're pregnant, you have to give it to her. In their minds, this child isn't mine. They saw it first. I'm just a vessel. Erin squeezed Eleanor's hand firmly. In law, there's no such thing as giving. As long as your DNA and this child's DNA are connected, you are the sole legal mother. Unless you sign away custody, no one can take this child from you. But what if they force me to sign? Eleanor's voice wavered again. Like they forced me to give up my scholarship. When I was 16, I won a summer scholarship to Westermark College. They said Serena also wanted to study abroad, and the family budget only covered one person, so I should give it up. I did. Serena went to Windsor and came back with a pile of photos, while I stayed in Eldbrook for a summer job stocking shelves at a convenience store. Back then I thought, well, she's my sister. Erin's hand tightened sharply, and Eleanor winced. Realizing her reaction, Erin loosened at once, but the anger in her eyes was barely contained. They made you give up a scholarship. Not just that. Eleanor felt the pent-up grievances of years flooding out, uncontrollable. In middle school, I was selected for the national maths competition. Serena said she wanted to go too, but there was only one spot. Mum told me to give it to her, saying Serena was weak in maths, and it would be a good opportunity. I could always try again later, because I was strong. Serena ended up with a third-place prize and posted, "Just winged it" on social media, with loads of praise. That day I was clearing trays in the cafeteria, and overheard classmates gossiping that the Harpers had two daughters, the older one clever and pretty, the younger one, no presents. She paused and sniffled hard. In high school, I wrote a short essay on the Seven River ecology that was chosen as the cover article for the school magazine. Dad read it and said, "What's the use of writing this stuff? Can it make money?" The same week, Serena played a walk-on role in the school play with 3 lines. Mum brought her DSLR and took over 200 photos, then had a whole album printed. For university, I got into Eldbrook University's biomedical science program. Serena went to Milford for arts management. My parents rented her a flat in Milford for £1,200 a month. I lived in government-subsidized student housing, a single room with a view of the rubbish bins. I never complained to them, because I kept thinking, if I just stayed quiet and didn't cause trouble, they'd eventually see me, right? Erin listened, her knuckles white. She stood up abruptly and walked to the window, her back to Eleanor, her shoulders rising and falling. After about half a minute, she turned back. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady as iron. "You're wrong. They won't. It took me 16 years to learn this. Some people don't love you because you're good to them. They just keep using you because you're useful." She walked back to the bed, crouched down, and looked directly into Eleanor's eyes. "You asked me when I found out about you. I was 14 when Dorothy told me. My first thought was, I have to find her. I have to see what she looks like, whether she's okay." But Dorothy stopped me. She said, "Erin, if you go now, you'll only disrupt her life. She has her own parents, her own path. You'd be an intruder." I believed her then. I waited 16 years. I finished school, studied law at Oxford, joined a firm that specialized in family disputes. I saw families tear each other apart every day. I fought for others, but I never dared to look up that file myself. Until last year, when Dorothy passed away. I found that statement in the hidden compartment of her study, and I sat at her empty desk and cried for 2 hours. Then I searched all the public records on the Harpers' property registration, school enrollments, health insurance. I found your name, Eleanor Harper. Graduate student in biomedical sciences at Eldbrook University. I saw a photo on the faculty website. You were standing in a lab in a white coat, holding a petri dish, smiling so lightly. A tear finally fell from Erin's eye, splashing on the bedsheet and darkening a small circle. I recognized that face instantly. I see it every morning in the mirror. But your eyes were different. You had a particular wariness, a fear of bothering anyone. I stared at that photo for a whole night, and then I decided no matter if you blamed me, rejected me, thought I was here to make trouble, I would come to you. Eleanor stared at the woman crouched by her bed. That face, identical to hers, now streaked with tears, but the resolve in her eyes was like tempered steel. She remembered yesterday afternoon, when she lay on the floor clutching her belly, her mother screaming, her father standing by, Serena pretending to pull back. This woman had calmly called an ambulance, calmly climbed into it, and calmly broken through the 21 years of family veneer with every word. You didn't come to get revenge on them?" Eleanor asked softly. Erin shook her head. "I came to take you away." At that moment, the ward door was gently tapped. A young woman in a grey suit carrying a briefcase poked her head in wire-rimmed glasses perched on her nose and nodded at Erin. "Miss Blake, I'm here. I brought the documents." Erin stood up, wiped the corners of her eyes, and resumed her professional demeanor. "Come in. This is my colleague, Laura Bennett, a solicitor specializing in family law. She's brought some initial drafts." Laura stepped in, placed the briefcase on the bedside cabinet, and glanced at Eleanor on the bed, the flash of surprise crossing her face. She evidently knew Erin had a twin sister, but seeing two nearly identical faces still required a moment of adjustment. Quickly composing herself, she pulled 3 neatly stapled documents from her bag and handed them to Eleanor. The first is a petition for confirmation of kinship, essentially an application to the court for mandatory DNA testing of Violet Harper and Richard Harper. Once the results confirm you are their biological child, combined with Miss Blake's birth records, we have a complete chain of evidence. Laura turned to the second document. This is a draft restraining order, based on grounds of physical assault, psychological abuse, and attempted unlawful deprivation of personal freedom. If your mother's strike is medically classified as at least minor injury, we can also initiate preliminary criminal assault proceedings. Eleanor's gaze paused on the phrase, criminal assault proceedings. She touched her belly, where a faint but persistent heartbeat lay inside. If Violet's blow had landed slightly off the most vulnerable point, if Eleanor's lower back hadn't hit the cabinet corner and dispersed the force, she didn't dare think about it. The third, Laura said, lowering her voice, is a declaration of independent living and financial independence acknowledgement. Once you sign, we can petition the court to legally sever your economic and residential reliance on your birth family, which will greatly support your independent custody rights later. This does not automatically waive inheritance rights, it's purely procedural. While Eleanor reviewed the documents, Erin walked to the window and made a phone call. Her voice was low, but the room was quiet enough that Eleanor caught fragments. "Yes, tomorrow morning. St. Mary's Archives. Morrison's address. I'll go myself in the afternoon." Eleanor suddenly felt how unreal everything was. 24 hours earlier, she was just an ordinary postgraduate student, living on her scholarship, doing cell biology research, buying discounted salmon and pre-packed salads at the supermarket each week, occasionally going home for a meal, always checking ahead. Is it convenient today? For fear of walking into one of Serena's grand returns and feeling redundant. Now she lay in a hospital bed, holding 3 legal documents that could bring her birth family to court, beside a sister who shared her womb yet had been separated for 21 years. She looked down at the signature line, at the bottom of the last page, a blank waiting for Eleanor Harper. The pen lay on the bedside cabinet, a black ballpoint Laura had brought. Eleanor reached for the pen. As her fingers touched the barrel, a faint twinge came from her belly. She drew her hand back, placed it over the spot, gently as if holding a newly hatched bird. "After I sign," she asked Laura, "will they be notified?" Laura pushed her glasses up. "Once the restraining order is filed, court bailiffs will serve a notice in person. The DNA application will also send a copy to their registered address. So within 3 days at the latest, the Harpers will officially receive notification that you've initiated legal proceedings." Eleanor closed her eyes. She could picture it, Violet opening the registered letter, seeing the court crest, her face turning from ashen to white. Richard standing beside her, his everlasting cup of Earl Grey in hand, the rim touching his lower lip but forgotten. Serena screaming, throwing things, bursting into Violet's room demanding, "How dare she?" Then Violet would call, probably hysterically, screaming, "You ungrateful wretch," maybe crying, saying, "I carried twins for 7 months, you both came from my body. How could I not love you?" Eleanor knew that routine too well. Whenever she showed even a hint of hurt, a reddening of the eyes, a bowed head, Violet would trot out the old refrain. "I vomited for 7 months, when I was pregnant with you. I hemorrhaged giving birth to you. You kept me up all night crying." Every time, it ended with Eleanor swallowing her feelings and apologizing. Every time. But that was before she knew about the note. Second twin is quiet, not prone to crying, should adapt more quickly to a new environment. Now she knew. She opened her eyes, picked up the pen, and signed her name at the bottom of the third document, Eleanor Harper. The letters were a little wobbly because the 4 in her left hand made it awkward, but every letter was clear. Erin came back from the phone call, saw the signed document, said nothing, but took a key from her pocket and placed it in Eleanor's open palm. It was a silver key with a small rubber fob, a plump grey pigeon. "I've rented a flat near Goldgate, 2 bedrooms, south-facing, with a small balcony overlooking the canal," Erin said. 3-year lease. 1 room is empty, I saved it for you. If you're willing, move in when you're discharged. That pigeon was Dorothy's. She called it Pigeon, because she thought the pigeons of Eldbrook had more grit than people. "I've kept this keychain since she died. Now it's yours." Eleanor closed her fingers around the key, the cool metal seeping into her palm. She looked again at the sonogram on the bedside table, that tiny grey shadow, that embryo the size of a grain of rice, heartbeat 156 BPM, fast and steady. "I want to see them," Eleanor said suddenly. Erin frowned. "Now?" "Not now. When I'm well enough to sit in a wheelchair." Eleanor put the key in her pocket and lifted her head. That timid quality in her gaze was slowly fading. "I don't want to just shut them out with a restraining order. They'll always think it was outside influence, that Eleanor has been brainwashed. I want to say it to their faces, have Violet look me in the eye and tell me that quiet note was hers and no one else's. I want Richard to admit that he stood there watching me get hit, and said nothing, because he had already agreed to the give the child to Serena plan. And I want Serena. I want her to say to my face whether she really believes the baby inside me belongs to her." Erin stared at her for 3 seconds, then nodded. "I'll arrange it. The venue shouldn't be at home, or in the hospital. Something neutral, with surveillance, like my firm's conference room." Laura added, "In that case, I suggest we also prepare a meeting consent form explicitly stating that the meeting will be audio and video recorded, and that the recordings can be used as supplementary evidence in subsequent legal procedures. They can decline, and then we won't meet. But if they come, they voluntarily consent to being recorded." Eleanor said, "Good." The mist over the Severn River was thickest at 4:30 a.m., then began to lift. The pleasure boats hadn't started running. Only a grey-white gull skimmed the water, its wingtips raising a string of droplets. Eleanor settled back into her pillow. Erin dimmed the bedside light and returned to the narrow visitor's chair. This time she didn't sleep, but leaned back, watching the sky gradually brighten outside. Miles away in the Harper house, the night was equally long. Violet hadn't slept at all. She sat at the oak kitchen table, a cup of cold chamomile tea before her, a thin film forming on the surface. She stared at that film for a long time, recalling this morning. No, yesterday morning, she had planned to go to Morris's to buy the raspberry muffins Eleanor loved. Every time Eleanor came home, she would ask, "Is there any muffin?" in that careful tone, as if it were a favor. 8 times out of 10, Violet would say forgot to buy, but actually she just couldn't be bothered. Yesterday morning she had intended to buy them, but as she left the house, Her phone rang. Serena texted she was coming back and wanted the muffins from Windsor's. Windsor's was on Windsor Avenue, Morris's was on the corner. Violet chose Windsor Avenue. And she forgot Eleanor's raspberry muffins. Now, sitting at the table, she could still feel the sensation of yesterday afternoon's blow on Eleanor's belly, her knuckles meeting the soft, but resilient fabric, beneath it the slightly swollen, warm curve of another life. How much force had she used? She couldn't remember. She only remembered that when she saw Eleanor's "I have good news" expression, a buzz went off in her head, like something exploding. Because that good news should have been Serena's. That thought was like a rusted nail driven deep into Violet's consciousness. From the time Eleanor was 14, Violet had kept an invisible timetable in her head. Serena should be the first to date, to marry, to have children. Eleanor could stay quietly in her lab doing research, occasionally come home to help Serena with the baby, be a sweet little aunt. Wasn't that nice? Eleanor was quiet, suited to be a helper. Serena was outgoing, suited to be the main character. Violet had always thought of that as rational division of labor. Like cutting a cake, give the strawberry to Serena, the sponge to Eleanor, because Serena loved strawberries, and Eleanor never said what she liked. So if she didn't say, she must be fine with anything. And someone who is fine with anything, what's the harm in yielding a little? But last night, when she knelt on the floor wiping blood with tissues, she suddenly realized the stain was larger than she'd thought. She used 7 tissues to clean it completely, each one turning from white to dark red. That was Eleanor's blood. The baby inside her, the one that, according to Eleanor, would have a heartbeat visible next week, almost gone with one slap. Violet buried her face in her hands. The kitchen radiator hummed. The clock on the wall read 5:17 a.m. Footsteps sounded on the stairs, heavy, dragging Richard. He wore a rumpled navy robe, his hair messy, dark circles under his eyes. He came to the table, didn't sit, leaned against the counter, took out a bottle of whiskey, poured himself a finger, and swallowed it in one go. The sound of the liquor burning down his throat was starkly clear in the quiet kitchen. "She's not replying," Richard said hoarsely. "I sent 12 texts, called 7 times, all straight to voicemail." Violet didn't look up. She knew Eleanor wouldn't reply. She knew her daughter Eleanor never voluntarily cut ties, but once she was hurt badly enough, she wouldn't argue or smash things. She would just quietly, completely disappear. Like when they were young and Serena broke the music box Eleanor had saved up for. Eleanor didn't cry or make a scene. The next day, she cleared out her bedside cabinet and put everything Serena had ever touched into a cardboard box, pushing it to the top of her wardrobe. That box was never opened again. Violet noticed it once while cleaning. Inside were colored pencils, a sketchbook, some hairpins, all things Serena had borrowed and forgotten to return. Eleanor never drew again after that day. Violet thought it was fine, one less hobby, less expense. Until 10 years later, when she came across a framed sketch, while sorting old things drawn by Eleanor at 9 years old, of 4 family members holding hands in the garden. Everyone in the drawing was smiling exaggeratedly, but Eleanor had placed herself at the very edge, with only half a hand drawn, because the frame had cut off the edge. Violet slid that drawing back into the bottom drawer, and never hung it up. "She'll come back," Violet finally said, her voice rough as sandpaper on rusty iron. "Eleanor, she's soft-hearted. Once she calms down, she'll come back." Richard set the empty glass on the counter with a sharp clink. He turned his head and looked out the kitchen window at the back garden. The lawn was carpeted with golden ginkgo leaves, thick and deep. That ginkgo was planted the year Eleanor was born. Violet had said, "Plant a tree for each child, good luck." Later, both Eleanor and Serena were born, but they planted only one tree. Violet had said, "Twins, one tree is enough." Richard suddenly said. That woman Erin, she looks exactly like Eleanor. Exactly. You saw it, didn't you? Violet's fingers curled. She had seen it. The instant she opened the door, she thought she was seeing a ghost. The child she had sent away 21 years ago, the one she'd held for only 3 minutes in the delivery room before the nurse took her, had grown into a tall, sharp-eyed woman standing on her doorstep, radiating, "I've come to settle accounts." How did she find us? Richard turned, a note of alarm creeping into his voice. Didn't the agency promise confidentiality? That Dorothy Blake, she signed a confidentiality agreement, didn't she? Violet slowly lifted her head. She looked at Richard's face, the face she had lived with for 30 years, now overlaid with panic at exposure. Suddenly he seemed a stranger. Back then, outside the delivery room of St. Mary's, she had signed all the papers alone. Richard's only contribution, when she hesitated, was, "Don't hesitate. It's better to raise one well than two poorly." That sentence had been a blunt knife, cutting the cord between her and one daughter. For 30 years, she occasionally dreamed of the child she gave away, dreamed that she grew up and came back, asking why. Each time she woke, she consoled herself. She must be doing fine. The adopter was a university professor, better off than us. She used "better off" as a sticking plaster over the wound on her conscience for 21 years. But yesterday Erin said, "Dorothy died last year." The plaster was ripped off. The wound lay open, the flesh still raw after 21 years. If she really gets the files, Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice, "Morrison, the head nurse." Violet shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the tiles. She glared at Richard. "You dare mention Morrison? You were the one who told her privately to add a word. You had her write in the report that the second twin was physically weak and needed special care. Why did you add that?" Richard's face reddened. He stepped back, his lips moving without sound, finally forcing out, I was afraid the agency wouldn't want a healthy twin. I was worried the paperwork would drag on and I couldn't take that much time off work." "So you had her write sickly?" Violet's voice shot up, making the cups in the cupboard rattle. "Do you know that kind of notation would have docked points against her in the adoption process? Kept her waiting longer in the institution. Dorothy was a professor, sure, but when she took Kate, the file said requires periodic check UPS, possible developmental delay. Do you know how many needles Erin had to endure as a child because of that damned weak label?" Richard was now beet red. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but Violet didn't let him. She strode around the table, pointed a trembling finger at his chest. "I hit Eleanor yesterday. I hit her with my own hand. I hit the daughter I carried for 7 months. Do you know what was going through my head at that moment? I thought, she can't be pregnant before Serena, the first grandchild has to be Serena's. I'm her mother. I didn't think my daughter is pregnant. I'm going to be a grandmother. I thought she'd ruined Serena's turn." Her voice cracked. Tears dropped onto Richard's robe, darkening the fabric. "Richard, we ruined Serena. We gave her everything. She's 23 now, no steady job, living on our monthly allowance. When she heard Eleanor was pregnant, her first reaction wasn't, 'I'm going to be an aunt,' it was, 'I should have that child.' What have we raised her to be? A spoilt brat who thinks the whole world revolves around her." Richard backed away 2 steps, his lower back hitting the counter edge. He grunted. He hung his head, staring at his bare feet, toenails long unclipped, grayish. More footsteps came from the stairs, light, tiptoeing. Serena, in pink loungewear, messy hair, mascara smudged into 2 gray-black smudges, stood at the kitchen door, phone in hand, the screen lit up with an unsent text. "I heard you arguing," Serena said, her voice hoarse but with a forced composure. I messaged Eleanor, she didn't reply. I called that Blake firm, the receptionist said Erin Blake was out all day and wasn't taking phone appointments. Violet turned and looked at Serena. For the first time, she saw an expression on that carefully maintained face that was not pout or petulance, it was a feral, cornered panic. Mum, Serena came in and turned the phone screen toward Violet. Look at this, I screenshot Eleanor's social media. She posted this yesterday afternoon, just a photo of her scan appointment with a little duck emoji. Over 20 likes, all her lab colleagues. None of us, not me, not you, not Dad. Violet looked at the screenshot. Fetal heartbeat monitoring, week 7, the date was next week. Eleanor had posted it yesterday, probably just after leaving the hospital, clutching the blood test, heading home full of joy. She hadn't first shared the news in the family group chat. Only on her public account. What did that mean? It meant Eleanor had long since accepted that the family group chat was not a place for good news. She had been so careful in that house for 21 years that she had learned to hide good news, because once Serena saw it, she would take it. Violet suddenly remembered last Christmas Eleanor had bought her a navy blue cashmere scarf, tag still on, and left it on the coffee table. Serena saw it and said, "Pretty, Mum, if you don't want it, I'll take it," and unwrapped it right then, wrapped it around her own neck, and posted a 9-photo grid. Eleanor had stood there, still holding the shopping bag, pressed her lips together, and said nothing. That scarf never returned to Violet. Serena said, "Anyway, Eleanor never wears scarves, Mum, you still have that old plaid one, right?" Violet had worn that old plaid scarf all winter. Violet looked at Serena, who was even now wearing that navy cashmere scarf draped over her pajama top like a shawl. In the middle of autumn, give the scarf back to Eleanor. Serena blinked. What? The scarf. Navy blue. The one Eleanor bought me last Christmas, that you took. Violet's voice was eerily calm, like the last seconds before a storm. It's in the left-hand second drawer of your wardrobe, I saw it when I put away your clothes yesterday. Go up now, take it off, and put it on Eleanor's bedside table. Serena's eyes widened. Mum, what do you mean it's just a scarf? Go get it. Violet repeated, her voice rising a full octave, the final note breaking. Now. Serena's face shifted from surprise to anger to a kind of inarticulate grievance. She stamped her foot, her slipper slapping against the tile, and ran upstairs. A few minutes later, rummaging and slamming cupboards echoed down the stairs. Richard leaned against the counter, eyes closed, face in his hands. Violet returned to the table, picked up the cold chamomile tea, and took a sip, the bitter herbal liquid sliding down her throat. She set the cup down, picked up her phone, her thumb hovering over Eleanor's name in her contacts for a long time, then put it down without pressing. She typed a short message. Eleanor, Mum was wrong. If you're willing, please call back. She stared at those words for 5 minutes, then deleted Mum was wrong, replaced it with Mum misses you, deleted again, and changed it to come home for dinner, I'll buy your favorite raspberry muffins. When she finally sent it, her thumb was trembling. The message went out. A gray, delivered checkmark. No read, no reply. Outside, the sky had fully brightened. The mist over the Severn had cleared. Sunlight filtered through gaps in the clouds, falling on the withered mint plant on the kitchen windowsill. Violet remembered that mint plant. Eleanor had grown it in primary school for a biology project. After bringing it home, Violet forgot to water it, and it mostly wilted. Eleanor quietly revived a few leaves. Later, when Eleanor went to university, no one tended it, only a few dry brown stalks stood in the cracked soil. Violet reached out, pulled the dead mint out, and threw it in the bin. The ceramic pot was empty, showing a layer of grayish-white old soil at the bottom. She stared at the empty pot for a long time. In her mind's eye, Eleanor's 9-year-old sketch appeared, 4 hands holding, the edge hand only half drawn. Why hadn't she hung that drawing? Why hadn't she asked, "Why did you only draw half a hand?" Maybe Eleanor would have answered, "Because I feel like I only half belong to this family." She had never asked. Upstairs came the slam of Serena's door. Violet looked up, hearing Serena's slippers rush into Eleanor's room. That room, though Eleanor had rarely stayed in it since university, Violet kept it as it was. Fresh sheets once a month, the desk dusted. Serena pushed the door open with force, then came the sounds of rummaging. Violet went upstairs and stood at Eleanor's door. Serena was pulling Eleanor's old clothes out of the wardrobe and tossing them onto the bed, muttering, "I put the scarf on the nightstand, but she has so much stuff." Eleanor's wardrobe was meticulously neat, all clothes folded by color and thickness. On the top shelf was that cardboard box, the one Eleanor had sealed at 9, pushed to the highest shelf. Serena stood on tiptoe, yanked the box down. It hit the floor with a thud, splitting the edge, and a sketchbook rolled out. Serena picked it up, flipped it open. Eleanor's childhood drawings, family, garden, the ginkgo tree. Serena scoffed, "What rubbish, the people are all lopsided."